This computer. All right. Says we're recording. Hey, everybody. This is Russell with the Case for a Baseball Hall of Fame podcast. I'm very excited here to welcome another guest on the show, the great Chuck Brodsky, singer-songwriter. Chuck's written a lot of great songs about baseball, as well as other interesting subjects. So we're here today really to talk about Chuck's background and baseball songwriting. So, Chuck, thanks for being here today.
Oh, my pleasure. It's great to be with you.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you a lot of questions about your music. First of all, just for all our listeners out there, you grew up in the Philadelphia area, correct?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Yeah. And I saw you went to Forbes Field, old Forbes Field with your dad to go to Phillies games.
Oh, Connie Mack Stadium.
Did I say Forbes Field?
Yeah.
Yeah, correct me. Yeah, please correct me. Yeah. I see the old Phillies pennant in there. I do want to say, just you're my guest. We'll keep everything polite, professional. I grew up in Atlanta, so I'm a diehard Braves fan, but we'll keep it true. In an effort to keep this truce, I wore my Dale Murphy shirt because he's a player that
That's right.
both fan bases can embrace. Of course, he played for the Phillies, after the Braves. So, um, tell us a little bit about how you got into baseball as a kid.
Well, my dad's always been really into baseball. He played growing up. He played high school ball, played sandlot ball. He played in the Army. That was actually his gig in the Army in
Wow.
Korea and in Japan. And so when I was a kid growing up, we lived across the street from a school with ball fields. We lived on a corner. There were ball fields across the street, directly in front of the house and to the side of the house. So after dinner, Dad would hit me fungo fly balls, and we'd have a catch. And the company that he worked for when I was very little had season tickets to the Phillies at Connie Mack Stadium, but the Phillies stunk and the stadium was in a very bad neighborhood, so nobody ever wanted the tickets except for my dad. They were great seats. They were like field box seats just to the home plate side of the visitors' dugout, and it was fantastic as a kid going down there. So I think as I got older and was into writing songs and pursuing music for a career, of course, that's not an easy thing for parents to necessarily be thrilled about.
Sure.
But I think the fact that I started writing a couple of songs early on about baseball acted as a bridge towards my dad. And it was common ground. It was material that he could relate to. And once I started doing that, one song led to two songs led to four songs led to eight, and now I'm up to 23 baseball songs, and my dad has loved every step of it. He's probably my biggest fan.
That's awesome. And I don't want to get straight into the waterworks, right out of the gate, but it's amazing how, baseball has that ability to just bring the generations together. I mean, that's, essentially the plot of Field of Dreams. It's this great movie about baseball history, but at its heart, it's a story of, a father and a son, had sort of a troubled relationship, reconciling and everything like that. So, um, how important, was baseball to you and your father's relationship until to this day? Is it?
I think it's very important.
Yeah,
Like I said, it was a bridge for us to find our way back after those, rougher teenage and early college years when
sure,
I veered off the normal accepted path and headed towards music.
sure.
So, like I said, it was a bridge, but today it's something that we very much love to share, and I don't think we've ever had a conversation either in person or over the phone where baseball didn't come up in one way or another, whether it be last night's game or something else about baseball. But it's something that I'd call it a glue,
Oh,
and I
absolutely.
and I think it serves that very same purpose in a lot of families. So I've been told by a lot of other people. It just at times when there's nothing else to talk about, there's always baseball.
Absolutely. And I don't want to make this all about myself. I wanted to interview you, but I wanted to talk about it because my parents passed away in 2020, and they both were Braves fans, and that's kind of how I got into it. And like a lot of people, my dad and I had good and bad, eras of our relationship, but it seemed like sports and baseball was always a common thread, and I've mentioned that on the pod too. The connection between both of my parents and baseball. When my mom passed, I told my brother, I said, "There's really only two things I want to find in her stuff. One, my parents were at the Braves game when Hank Aaron hit 715, and they had a certificate. And I found it as a kid in the ticket stub, and I framed it, and it was lost for years. So I said to my brother, so that's like the only thing I really want to find. That, and I had a photo. My mom took me to the last Braves game, regular season game at Atlanta Fulton County Stadium. And there's a picture of the two of us. Someone took it on one of those crappy disposable cameras, and there was a sunset. And I was like, I need to find that picture because that's like the only two things I wanted, the glue of the years. And I remember when my mom and I, over the years, I moved away, she would cut out clippings of like what Chipper Jones and stuff was doing and mail it to me. Oh, I saw this in the newspaper. So anyway, I didn't want to make it about me, but I want to let you know I totally get it.
That's great. And the fact that you went to the last game at Fulton County Stadium, my dad and I went to the last game at Connie Mack Stadium.
That's awesome. Awesome. Yeah.
And I know things were different later on at Fulton County Stadium, but at Connie Mack, the fans stripped that stadium bare. Starting from like the first or second inning on, you could hear a steady pounding in unison all around the stadium. People trying to kick their seats off the hinges, which
Wow.
my dad and I did.
That's
And
awesome.
I actually have one of the seats.
Oh, really? Still to this day?
Yeah, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I wonder if by the time Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, some of the more recent stadiums were done, they had realized, oh, we better tell everyone not to. Because I remember they would sell the seats because our little league part had seats. It still to this day has seats from Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, like you can buy them. So I think they did that with Yankee Stadium too. I think every piece was like auctioned off and sold.
That was the plan with Connie Mack Stadium.
Yeah.
They did have plans to either auction off or raffle off things like the bases and
Yeah.
other fixtures from the stadium, but from like the seventh inning on, there were fans in the outfield trying to pull planks of the outfield fence down. They had to threaten to forfeit the game several times if the fans didn't get off the field. People took everything. There was
That's
nothing
wild.
left to raffle. I remember cars with the urinal troughs
Yeah, who
strapped to the
wants that?
roof.
Yeah. That's gross. Yeah. Atlanta Fulton County Stadium had those troughs too. It's disgusting. Who wants that? In some ways, though, I could see if you had a dive bar or something, it's like that would be a cool thing to have in the bathroom or the dive bar. Like, yeah, remember the urinals?
Yeah.
Well, I promised I would be polite since you're a Phillies fan. I'm a Braves fan. There's a big rivalry, but I was going to make a joke here about the Phillies fan base, Philadelphia sports fans. This is probably a good segue. You kind of get into that yourself in your song "Letters in the Dirt" about Dick Allen, and you even reference the throwing the snowballs at Santa Claus. So, you know, um, I wanted to talk to you about that because I did an episode about Dick Allen, and when I had the idea to make this podcast, Dick Allen was on a short list of players, along with Dave Parker, Lou Whitaker, Dale Murphy, who I thought I can't believe these guys aren't in the Hall of Fame. Um, we got the good news just this past summer. Dick Allen, is now in the Hall of Fame. How did that make you feel?
Oh, I'm thrilled. I have to qualify that by saying it should have happened long ago, and it
Absolutely.
really should have. And the fact that he was denied twice by the Veterans Committee, the last time, the day before, I guess he died either the day of the vote or the day before the vote. But I'm thrilled he got in, but I'm very sorry that he didn't get to know this.
Yeah, it was, and it's interesting. It was bittersweet because he gets in with Dave Parker, and Dave is, put in his mid to late 70s. He's got Parkinson's, and I think the general consensus amongst fans is Parker belongs in. Get this guy in before he's another posthumous induction. So it was bittersweet that okay, Dave is not in good health, you know, but he should be around for next summer. He'll be there in person, but Dick is not going to be. So that was sort of bittersweet, but. I mean, it's. I'd rather see Dick Allen get in posthumously than not at all.
Of course. Yeah.
And I told you I wasn't going to quiz you on stats, but I wanted to say something just for our listeners. When I was doing my research on Dick Allen's episode, not only was he Rookie of the Year MVP, but he was one of only 10 players to have 350 home runs, 1,000 or more RBI, 1,000 or more runs, 100 or more stolen bases, and 75 or more triples. I thought, okay, that's 10 players. And then he's also one of four players with 350 or more home runs, a 290 or higher batting average, a 375 or higher on base percentage, a career OPS of 155 or higher, 75 or more triples, and 100 or more stolen bases. I know it's I'm throwing a lot, but the other guys are Barry Bonds, Babe Ruth, Willie Mays, and Lou Gehrig. So I thought, this guy's in rare territory, and we're getting into sort of the advanced stats. His adjusted OPS plus of 156 ties him with Frank Thomas for 25th all time. That was a big factor for me when I did my episode on Dick Allen, especially when you consider the guys tied for 27th all time on OPS plus with 155. That's Hank Aaron, Joe DiMaggio, Willie Mays, and Mel Ott. So I'm throwing a lot of stats out there for our listeners, but to me, I was like, this guy is Hall of Fame material. He didn't quite have some of the career numbers, but his career was different than others because he had a lot of issues he had to deal with that players today don't have to deal with. And I'm stealing your thunder. That's kind of what you mentioned in Letters of the Dirt. As a Dick Allen fan, as soon as I saw that title, I knew exactly what you were talking about. But for our listeners that may not, tell us about that, Letters in the Dirt. What does that mean?
Dick Allen used to get booed every time he'd come up to bat in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And, there were numerous reasons for that, one of which was the fact that he was the first African American star the
Yeah.
Phillies ever had. And this was the early mid 1960s. And he also, he had a personality.
Yeah.
He was a human being with a personality. And at that time, I think African American players were just expected to keep their mouths shut and their heads down and just blend in and not stand out except, by their playing. And that's just not who he was. And it wasn't fair to hold him to that kind of a thing. So, he spoke his mind when it was appropriate to do so, maybe even when it wasn't.
Sure.
But that's who he was, and it got him into some trouble with some fans and with some sports writers. Also, the Phillies had an epic collapse in 1964, where they had a 6.5 game lead with 12 games to play, and they promptly collapsed. And World
Happens.
Series tickets were printed. I have a
Yeah.
couple of them. They didn't win the pennant, and so the fans became very bitter after that 1964 season, his rookie season.
Yeah.
And he's in addition to being a great player who hit a lot of home runs, he struck out a lot, as home
Sure.
run hitters often do.
Right.
And so he incurred quite a lot of the wrath of the Philadelphia fans. So in response to that, instead of making some obscene gesture back at the fans like players today might do, he waited patiently until the Phillies were back in the field on defense. And after a couple of seasons, they moved him to first base. And by this time, the booing had gotten really bad. And so in between pitches, he would stand at first base and he would write boo in the dirt or other things,
Mhm.
including OCT1. At some point, he started writing that, which was because he'd asked the Phillies to trade him.
Oh,
October 1st was the day after the season ended, where he imagined himself being free from the Philadelphia Phillies.
wow. I didn't know about that.
Yeah,
That's pretty
yeah,
specific, October. That's a
yeah.
deep cut. Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's interesting. And he also, I remember researching, he wore that helmet. He wore they call it the nacho helmet now, the flapless helmet, but he would wear that in the field because people would
Because
roast him
fans
for it.
threw batteries at him
Yeah.
and bottles and whatever they had, coins.
Yeah. And that's one of and luckily he's in the Hall of Fame now, but that was one of the things I mentioned in my episode. I've got my, Brooklyn hat on. We had Jackie Robinson Day this week. It's kind of I'm just lumping into the whole week, Jackie Robinson week. But yeah, Jackie, the story of Jackie is that they said if this is going to work, you've got to sort of zip your mouth and just go out and play. Because if you start arguing with the fans or whatever, it's going to backfire. And then, but eventually, not everyone can do that. And there's a point where it's like not, people are people and let them play. And if they have a personality, they're gonna play. So yeah, that's interesting because Dick Allen didn't have that personality. I saw an interview once with King Griffey Jr. where he was talking about Jackie Robinson. He's like, I don't think I could. If somebody said something to me, I'd say something back. I'm like, I don't blame you. Nobody wants to deal with that. So shows you how incredible Jackie Robinson was. But I mentioned all this because Dick Allen was not that long after Jackie when he came up in the big leagues, and he had to deal with a lot of things. And so when you're looking at his career numbers and stuff, and it's these players don't exist in vacuums. It's real easy to go on Baseball Reference and say, oh, this guy has more hits of this and this and this. And it's like, you got to take into account the era they played and some of the off the field factors. But even with all that, he put up incredible numbers, as I mentioned, and won an MVP and won a Rookie of the Year. So,
Well, one thing a lot of people don't know about Dick Allen was that before the Phillies called him up in 1964, he played with their AAA club in Little Rock, Arkansas, the
yeah,
Travelers, where he literally was the first African American to cross Arkansas's color line.
wow.
And he was subjected to severe abuse, death threats, and all sorts of things. And back in 1963 in Little Rock, there was segregated housing, and
Sure.
he couldn't eat at the same restaurants with his teammates, et cetera, et cetera. So he had never experienced this before. He grew up in Pennsylvania, in Western Pennsylvania, and had never experienced racism on this level before until he was sent to Arkansas. And so by the time the Phillies brought him up to the majors at the very end of 63 and then his rookie season in 1964, he had just experienced some rather severe racism and I'm sure was on guard and wary.
Sure. It's tough enough being 18, 19, and then away from home. The minor leagues is a grind, and I mean it's just awful. And then having to deal with all that, BS. And yet somehow comes in, wins Rookie of the Year. Just it's like you don't have to be a psychologist to know. If he had had a supportive, home crowd in the minors, and probably would have. Yeah. Anyway, it's very sad and tragic what happened, but he endured and survived and thrived and succeeded. And so anyway, I'm very happy he's in the Hall of Fame. That was a big thing for me. And before I forget, I want to show you. I pulled out some of my old baseball cards there. I do have some Dick Allen baseball cards. I'll show you.
Oh
Just
yeah.
yeah, there's some. And then this is when he's on the White Sox. So I've got a few. Dick Allen was a little before my time, but I knew who he was from, older friends, older brothers and stuff like that. And then kind of got into baseball research as a kid. And of course, you can't get into baseball history without talking about Dick Allen. Um,
I have one for you.
oh, yeah, very, very nice. Oh, yeah, same with the Phillies. Very nice. Well
There's
done.
another one.
Very cool. Very cool. I love uh, I love when he had the glasses, the 60s glasses,
Yeah.
because it's like they're kind of, those Nick in the military they used to call those glasses the birth control devices, those 60s, big rims. Now they're back in style and everything like that, but he makes them look cool and kind of badass, They're
Yeah.
they're kind of you didn't have a lot of options in eyewear in the 60s, so he wore them and he looked cool. Um, when he got to the Sox in the 70s, he kind of wore the bigger, sort of stylish ones. They were a little cooler, but he made those horn rims look badass.
He did. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to talk. I saw you mentioned this in some of your other interviews to sort of tie in our conversations. The song Letters in the Dirt was not only sort of an ode to Dick Allen and everything he endured, but also a testament to the relationship with you and your dad. Tell us about that a little bit. I thought that was very touching.
Well, I would estimate that at least 50% of the crowd at Connie Mack Stadium was booing Dick Allen every time he came up to bat. And, my dad set a different example for me. My dad and I cheered Dick Allen every time he came up to bat or any opportunity we had.
Yeah.
So that really stood out to me. And when I was older and got around to wanting to write that song, that was a big element for me to remember how my dad set a different example.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. Very nice. Um, and you actually got to meet Dick Allen at one point. You should tell us
Yeah, it
about
was
that.
pretty thrilling. I'd been invited by the Baseball Hall of Fame to do a concert there, and it was on a Super Bowl Sunday a number of years ago, probably 25 years ago or so. And there weren't many people in Cooperstown at the time, but I was tipped off by the director of research, who was a friend of mine at that time, that Dick Allen happened to be in Cooperstown representing the Phillies for some kind of baseball occasion and would likely be staying at the Otesaga Hotel. And he suggested maybe I'd want to take a drive over there and see if I could leave a copy of the CD with the song on it at the front desk, and maybe they'd be nice enough to pass it on to Dick Allen. And I thought that was a great idea. I had nothing to lose by trying. And when I went over there and walked into the lobby, there was Dick Allen
That's awesome.
in the middle of a conversation with somebody.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. When was researching for my episode, I realized he was a singer too. I don't know if you had a chance to chat with him about that, but he had that hit, I think it was Echoes of November.
I
Um,
have it.
oh
I have it
yeah,
on the 45. Yeah.
very cool. Yeah, it's funny because it's not on Spotify, but this is, the internet can be sometimes a horrible, toxic place, but sometimes it's a beautiful place. And on YouTube, there's videos of people who still have the record playing it, and you can listen. And it's a great song, and he's got a good voice. So thought that was a really interesting way to tie baseball and music together. I don't know if you guys had a chance to chat about that. That's sort of a deep cut, but you did have a good conversation. I was watching another interviews where you showed him your album and the
Well, the
photos.
time that I met him,
Yeah,
I brought the album with me and I had it in my coat pocket and reached in and handed it to him and got a chance to show him a particular photo of the word "boo" in the dirt that we had composed, and it was a pretty special moment for me. I was hoping I could get a little reaction from him by showing that photo, and he actually a tear actually streamed down the side of his face when I showed it to him, which was just a very, very special moment
yeah.
for me.
That's great that you get to meet your hero, your
Yeah.
childhood hero, favorite player, and share your song with him. That's wonderful. I wanted to we could talk about Dick Allen all day. The more I've read about him, he's just become one of my favorite players. So that's great that we get to talk about him. I wanted to talk about some of your other baseball songs. You have a lot of songs where it's funny because some artists, they'll wear a Yankees hat or something, or may have a passing reference to baseball in a song, and like I'm a fan. It's like that's fine. Some people are just casual fans, but in the world of baseball nerddom, when I'm listening to your songs, I was like, this guy knows his stuff. He knows all the quirky, weird stories, and some I had never even heard of. As I've got the Jackie hat on, you've got the song about a white player playing in the Negro Leagues. Tell us about that a little. I had never heard that story before, and there's not a lot on the internet. And tell us about that because you might be the world's preeminent scholar on this issue and this guy. Yeah,
It's actually a fascinating story, in my opinion, anyway. I wanted to write a song about Jackie Robinson,
yeah,
and this predated the internet, or at least Google having been invented,
sure.
anyway. And so I went to a Borders bookstore in my parents' neighborhood when I was visiting them, and I found a book on Jackie Robinson, and I started to just flip through it. And for some amazing reason, unbeknownst to me, I landed on a page where I happened to notice just a paragraph, not even a full paragraph, a sentence, really, that just mentioned a man by the name of Eddie Klepp, playing for the Cleveland Buckeyes in the Negro Leagues as a white man. And I thought, wow,
Yeah.
this is the story I really want to tell. And let me just inject for a second that the kind of stories I'm looking to tell through songs about baseball are the lesser known.
Sure.
So Jackie Robinson is a very well known story,
Sure.
and that's a topic that I probably would shy away from in a direct kind of a way.
Sure.
There might be some way to include him in a song in a more backhanded way, but to just write a song about, say, Jackie or Babe Ruth or Ty Cobb or somebody that's so well known, there's a wealth of information out there on these people. So that's not really what I'm looking to do. But I came across this mention of Eddie Klepp, and I thought this will make this is the story.
Yeah.
Because who's ever heard of this, right?
I'd never heard of him until I heard your song.
So I mentioned it to my dad, and my dad suggested I call the Baseball Hall of Fame and see if anybody there would know something. So I did, not knowing that there was even such a thing as a research department at the Hall of Fame. So a receptionist answered the phone, and I asked, is there anybody who might know something about a fella named Eddie Klepp? And she said, let me put you through to the research department. And the person who happened to answer the call that day was the director of research, a man by the name of Tim Wiles. He's no longer with the Hall of Fame, but he was there for a number of years. And I asked him, have you ever heard of a player named Eddie Klepp? And his answer was, no. Who was he? So I told him all I knew, that he was the first white man to play in the Negro Leagues. And I figured that's it, dead end. But Tim's response was, wow, that sounds like it would make a really interesting poem or song. And I said, funny you should say that, because I'm a songwriter, and
Yeah.
that's exactly what I was hoping to do, turn this into a song. And Tim said, let me check through our files, just on the off chance we might have something about him. Let me take your number. So I gave him my number, and 20 or 30 minutes later, he phoned me back and he said, you're in luck. He found a couple of pages about Eddie Klepp, which he Xeroxed and mailed to me. And I wrote the song. But more importantly, that was the beginning of a really invaluable relationship with Tim
That's great.
at the Hall, because for at least the first 8 or 9 baseball songs that I wrote, the entire first volume of my Baseball Ballads album, Tim was responsible for providing me all the background information on the characters I was wanting to write about. Sometimes he sent me, manila envelope an inch thick or an inch and a half thick, full of Xeroxed pages of whoever it was I was wanting to write a song about. Ultimately, the internet, developed, and you could Google these things, and I didn't need to burden Tim with my requests as much or at all after a certain point. But certainly for the first batch of baseball songs that became my first baseball CD, Tim was an invaluable resource who provided me all of the background information that helped me write those songs.
That's great. I wanted to ask because my first thought when I was listening to your songs, I was a white guy playing in the Negro Leagues. Is my first thought, for all the history buffs out there, the league. I'm an attorney by day, and like during that era of 50s, 60s civil rights, that was sort of the thing was, we're going to have somebody try to go into this business or establishment, and then when they're denied or something, then we'll sue and it'll go through the court, and there was all these test cases. So my first thought was, oh, maybe this was some well-meaning person that was trying to do this in a way to, you know, have someone say no and they can start a test case. And then there's very little information on the internet. And what I was reading, there's a little bit of that, but there's also a little bit of it was just kind of a publicity stunt, like to get butts in the seat, so to speak. So, what's your take on why he was playing there? Was it, the good intentions? Was it just sort of a trying to sell tickets, or somewhere in between, or do we even know? Because there's very little information on this guy.
I think we don't really know,
Yeah.
but I would imagine from the Cleveland Buckeyes' perspective, it was a way of selling tickets. But I think from Eddie's perspective, he was a bona fide good ball player.
Okay.
but not quite good enough to make the major leagues. But he had an opportunity, and he went with it. I don't think he lasted very long. I think he only pitched 3 or 4 games, if I'm not mistaken. I would have to check his record
Sure.
to for accuracy, but um, he certainly was good enough to play at the high levels of the minor leagues, and I think this was an opportunity for him to play with some of the best players around and probably close to home. Interestingly enough, I somehow got connected to his widow
Oh,
a
wow.
number of years ago, 25 years ago at least, maybe 30, and she was still alive at the time. But they had a very odd relationship where he came and went, came and went. She wouldn't see him for a year or two. He spent
Okay.
time in prison.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he served time, I think, for arson and for
Wow.
robbery. And she didn't have a lot of good things to say about him, honestly. He was,
Okay,
he
interesting.
was
Yeah, this you got to write a song. This is interesting. And maybe I'm trying to put too much of a big picture on this, like, oh, he's trying to be a crusader for civil rights, or they're trying to have a big. Maybe it's just a guy looking to play and needed a paycheck, and maybe the
I
team was
think
like,
that's
yeah,
what it
sure,
was.
we'll throw you out there.
I think that's what it was. And
Yeah.
from Cleveland Buckeyes perspective, it was an odd, quirky thing that could draw more fans, sell more tickets, I'm sure. Um, but then again, he was a bona fide pitcher. He
Sure,
was a
yeah.
bona fide player, and good enough to play in the Negro leagues.
That's crazy. Yeah, that's a wild story. Another guy you wrote a song about. My wife actually gave me this book for Christmas. The Catcher Was a Spy,
Yeah,
story of Mo Berg. You have a song about Mo Berg.
I do.
What inspired you to write a song about Mo Berg? Did you know the story, or did you just come across it and then get inspired to write a song?
I don't remember exactly how I first came across the story, but I do remember my aunt telling me at one point that my great uncle knew Moberg, and
Oh,
we didn't
wow.
know how. So, again, Tim Wiles, from the research director from the Baseball Hall of Fame, helped me with background information. And I also read The Catcher Was a Spy, and I read another book on Moberg. And I wrote the song. And a few years after that, Moberg was inducted into the American Jewish Hall of Fame, I think it was. And the ceremony was held at the International Spy Museum in
Oh,
Washington, D.C., which had only just opened.
yeah, that's a cool museum. Yeah,
It's an amazing place.
yeah.
And in addition to me, they had another speaker guest who happened to be the curator of the CIA Museum, which I mentioned in my song because Moe's baseball card is on display at the CIA Museum. You have to be a CIA employee to have access to that museum,
Okay,
but I,
cool.
I knew that the card was there. I wrote that line into it. As I was listening to her presentation, the curator of the CIA Museum, she had an overhead projector with her, and she was showing Moberg's original application for employment with the OSS, the forerunner to the
Wow.
CIA. And on the second or third page, where Moberg had to list 3 personal references, one of them was my great uncle.
Wow, that's awesome. That's a really
Yeah,
cool story. Yeah,
yeah,
that's super cool. Yeah, and for all our listeners, I don't want to steal your thunder, but Mo Berg was a spy, and as I understood, he mentioned the song. He spoke a few languages, and I believe they correct me if I'm wrong that they were in Japan for some exhibitions. Was that correct? And they say, hey, while you're there, snap some photos and get some information. This is prior to World War II, correct?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
He went to visit the daughter of the U.S. ambassador to Japan and brought a disguise with him, a kimono, and other implements. And after visiting the daughter, he, I guess, snuck away to a restroom or a closet or something and changed into his disguise and
Wow.
made his way up to the rooftop and took photos of the Tokyo skyline, which later were used in the Doolittle bombing raids.
Wow. It's it's crazy where baseball and history and the Japanese American relations all kind of intertwined because I remember hearing a story that up prior to World War II that they were thinking about sending Babe Ruth over to try to be a sort of liaison because I guess the Japanese they had already liked baseball and they're crazy about baseball, so they thought maybe Babe Ruth could help prevent a war. But look how far we've come now. Otani, of course, is the biggest star in baseball, one of the greatest players ever, and it's the Dodgers and Cubs are playing that first series in Japan, and Japan loves baseball, so I'm just not to get on a soapbox, but happy that we can all unify as baseball fans, and that war is over and that period in history is over. But Mo Berg, that was a very interesting story. Did his part for his country and fascinating story. I have this book and listen to Chuck's song and read the book. It's by Nicholas Dawidoff. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Great story. I want to get into a few more stories before we wrap up. We're getting into some heavy, subjects. I will one more heavy subject because we're talking about it. I listened to your albums, Baseball Ballads and Baseball Ballads 2, and I felt like Baseball Ballads 1 had some more upbeat songs and some more quirky, fun topics, whereas Baseball Ballads 2 was a little heavier. Was that your intention, or did it just sort of happen that way?
I think it just sort of happened that way. I wasn't even aware of that until you mentioned this. I'll have to look at the two albums and see what I think about that. Um,
Yeah, because I you have some interesting. We don't probably don't have time to get into all of them, but you've got some stories about the curse, the Cubs curse. You've got a story about the Monrovians versus the Klan, the Death Row All Stars. I mean, there's some heavy topics here. And then this, I saw you had a track on there, number two. And, you're mentioning how you kind of focusing on sort of these more lesser known stories, but then you tackled the great Roberto on your song. And I have to say, I was driving around the other day. I've been listening to all your songs, and I said, all right, let me listen to this album. I saw the title track, Roberto. It's a beautiful day. I'm driving around Vegas. I said, oh no, this is going to make me cry, isn't it? And sure enough, I'm listening and beautiful song. You're talking about looking at the coast and seeing the ghosts and just like waterworks. I'm like, damn you, Chuck. Why'd you have to do that to me on this beautiful day? But absolutely beautiful song about the great Roberto. Tell us about that a little, because Roberto's one of my all-time favorites. I mention him probably every other episode of my podcast. He's one of the few players that I always refer to as the great, the great Roberto. You get into a lot of nuance in the song about, how heavy the plane was and the details and stuff. Tell us about that, your research for the song, because it's very specific and technical, but then also very artistic in terms of the emotion. So tell us about that.
I think the song is a really good example of something I alluded to a little earlier in the interview where, I don't typically write songs about the really well-known players unless there is a unique angle.
Yeah.
And, unfortunately, it was his death that was the unique angle, but it was so powerful, the loss of Roberto Clemente, that devastated so many people, and those of us who grew up in that era certainly remember when we first heard the news, and it was a tragic loss, especially because he lost his life trying to help
Mhm.
victims of an earthquake in Nicaragua.
Yeah.
So that just seemed like, anytime I can bridge baseball and some socially relevant ideal, that makes for a really interesting song for me to try to write. Interest, my own interest. Um, I could write. I mean, there's songs out there like "Hey Hey Willie Mays,"
Yeah.
but that doesn't take great thought to write that, and it doesn't take any research to write something like that.
Sure.
So that's not really up my alley, but something like this definitely is. And I read a biography on Roberto. I can't remember the title of it right now, or who the author was, but there was quite a bit about the humanitarian mission and how the plane went down just after taking off. And so that's all I was really trying to capture, that and how much he meant to so many people. Not his career accomplishments, not what he was like on a ball field, but what he meant to people, especially to Puerto Rican
Sure.
people. He was like their national hero.
Sure, yeah. I have to applaud, you were saying that the story of Jackie Robinson or something is so big. It's, you kind of, that's a big task to take on. I'm gonna write a song about Roberto Clemente, about his death. It's like, well, you sure you want to take on that task? That's, but the song is incredible. One of your most beautiful and touching songs. Like I said, I'm just streaming the waterworks. Like this is an incredible song and a very touching tribute to him. So, a beautiful song, and thank you for writing that. And I thought it was interesting. At first, it was the track list of your album goes from the story of Roberto, which I think there's a parallel as a musician and a baseball fan, in the music world and rock music and songwriting, there was, the day the music died, the plane crash that killed Buddy Holly, Big Bopper, Richie Valens, and it's sort of this pivotal, sad moment in music history. And in the plane crash of Roberto is sort of baseball's, the day, baseball. It's a very sad corollary, but there's some similarities there. So you took on some heavy material, but you pivoted into one of the sillier, crazier aspects of baseball history. The next track, Disco Demolition Night, which is a fun song. Tell us about that. What inspired you? I'm sure you grew up hearing the story of it. What inspired you to write that song?
How could you not? And that's just one of those things. I knew the story from when I was younger, and at this point in my life, I had already been writing baseball songs, and was thinking about what stories might make for interesting songs, and that one just jumped out. It was one of those bizarre events in baseball history, and I had a tremendous amount of fun writing that song, I do have to say.
I bet there's a line of, I try to keep my podcast sort of PG, family friendly, and there's a line in there about a couple doing adult things on the third base line or something. It was a wild night. If anyone's unfamiliar, you read about it. I was researching for today, and I had always heard. I wanted to ask if you heard. I had always heard this urban legend that Clarence Clemens was there that night. For all our listeners, Clarence Clemens, the big man, Bruce Springsteen's saxophone player. I had always heard, before the internet, you hear these urban legends and you just take them as gospel. And so I was researching, and apparently that's like not true. The damn AI ruins everything and research. But had you ever heard that story before? Because that was like an accepted urban legend I had always heard that Clarence
No,
Clemens was there.
I'd never heard that. But I was once on a flight with Clarence Clemens to
Oh, really?
Dublin, Ireland.
Really?
Yeah, had to walk right past him.
That's cool. Did you get a chance to chat with him at all?
No, no, and there were other people were kind of glomming onto him, and I
Sure.
didn't want to be that guy. But he stood at the baggage claim area like everybody else, waiting for his bag, and I was only a few feet away from him, but I wanted to just give him the respect of his privacy and
Sure, sure. Yeah.
leave him
It,
alone.
it's funny, like living in Vegas, there's a lot of celebrities, and I travel to LA for work and stuff, and there's a fine line between, you know, if the moment's there, you're sitting next to them at a bar watching a game or something, and you chat, that's natural. But I understand sometimes you don't want to walk up while they're eating and say, "Hi, Chuck, how are you? I love your music." So anyway, thanks for being on the show, as a celebrity yourself. I wanted to use this that to sort of segue into the greater, broader topic of musicians and songwriters who do baseball music. I had Dan Byrne on an interview, and he mentioned you. I have to say, I realized as I was listening to music, I knew some of your songs off of uh, I knew Take It Out Back, and Boys in the Back Room. The way the Spotify algorithm works, I think they'd popped up on, some of my autoplay. So I knew those songs for a while, and I liked those songs, but I'd never really gotten into your baseball songs, and I'm so happy I have. Just taken a deep dive. There's some great stuff here. There's not a lot of people who do baseball songs. Dan Byrne does a lot. You do a lot. Was there a conscious decision on your behalf to just say, I'm going to start writing these, or is that just where the muse took you, you know?
Well, I had once written a song called Lefty. That was my very first baseball song, and I actually was very shy about trying to play it out in public. It, it, I don't know why I felt this way, but I was pretty convinced that the general public would find a song about baseball to be trite.
Yeah.
I was not aware that there actually is a whole genre
Yeah.
of songs about baseball at this time. But
Glory days. Yeah.
I wrote that first one, and about 5 years after I wrote it, I got the nerve up to sing it sitting around a campfire with some songwriter friends, and they kind of flipped over it. And they told me I needed to be playing that song in my shows. So I started to play the song in my shows and experienced the same thing night after night from audiences. People would come up to me at the end of the shows and want to talk about that baseball song and tell me how much they liked it. So that's when I decided I was going to write that song about Jackie Robinson, which then became the song about Eddie Klepp instead.
Yeah.
And at this point, I had two baseball songs, but I was being referred to in the press as the songwriter who writes about baseball. And this is with two.
Yeah.
This is with just
Only
two
two. Yeah.
songs. But they were putting me in this category of the guy who writes about baseball. And I just thought, wow, it's getting noticed. And I feel like I'm getting away with murder. But
Yeah.
if I can, why not keep trying? And I wrote a third one, which I think was Letters in the Dirt. And either at that point or after the next one, which probably was Moberg, I started realizing that it really wasn't beyond my reach to write another 4 or 5 of those songs and compile them all on one album and actually do a whole album of baseball songs. So
That's great.
3 or 4 songs into it is when I first got that idea.
That's great. And I'll plug you here a little bit for our listeners. Chuck has incredible baseball songs. We're talking about him here, and there's more, we won't have time to get to, but he also has, if you like folk music, acoustic singer-songwriter stuff, some great songs, I'll call them secular, non-baseball songs. One of my favorites I was listening to is We Are Each Other's Angels. That's what a beautiful song. Um, Very beautiful song. I wanted to ask you about that a little bit. Where did that song come from? That's one of those songs you listen to, and songwriters say sometimes the song writes itself. You're just grabbing the lightning, so to speak, and channeling something. And that this seems like a timeless song. And I saw an interview you said you wrote it very quickly. All the great ones come quickly. So, tell us about that song, where how you wrote it, what happened.
Well, I was 21 years old. So this was 44 years ago.
Yeah.
And I had just hitchhiked from Philadelphia to San Francisco, and I wrote it the day that I arrived in San Francisco. And it was one of those cases where I really just held the pen and it moved,
Yeah.
and the song just pretty much flowed straight out of me. That's very rare. I mean, that just doesn't happen with me. Most of my songs take a tremendous amount of effort, and if they're historical, baseball songs, whatever, they take research, many, many revisions, lots of editing. I work really hard at them. But this song just flowed, and I made very, very few changes through the years to it. I did tweak it once or twice some years later. I wrote it because of something that somebody I met, I think it was a fellow hitchhiker, said to me. Back in those times, hitchhiking was more prevalent. It still wasn't something everybody did, and for good reason. But I was young and
Sure, yeah.
adventurous, and I can remember some several moments, different moments where I would be out in the middle of nowhere and there'd be another fellow hitchhiker, and okay, if they were there first, I had to wait till they got their ride before I tried to hitchhike. But meanwhile, we might sit and chat for 5 or 10 minutes, or share whatever food we had or what have you. And I remember one of them saying, as their parting words to me, "We are each other's angels,"
That's beautiful.
and that just blossomed in my mind. And by the time I got to San Francisco, and sat down with pen and paper, it just kind of all flowed out, and it was. It's hard to know what to say about that song. I'm so grateful to have it.
Oh,
I
sure.
know that from hearing from other people that it's meant a lot to to other people, and it's always meant a lot to me. But it's funny because I'm 44 years removed from writing it,
Sure, yeah.
and to still be getting praised for it is, it's an interesting little twist on things, because it's not anything I did recently. It's something I did so long ago
Sure.
in a different part of my life. And sure, who doesn't like to be praised? But it's certainly not like the last song I wrote, which is, I don't know if I'm making any sense with that,
No,
but
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a long time ago, and we're different people, and it's hard to access who you were, where you were at the time.
I still believe in those feelings. I still believe in that song, but I'm still being given credit for something that I did so very long ago,
Sure.
which is, just an interesting little twist.
Yeah, well, you've written a lot of great ones since then. There's a lot of great songs. I mentioned that we don't have enough time to get into all your baseball songs. I won't get into all your non-baseball songs, but I really, really enjoyed "We Are Each Other's Angels." That was one of those songs. I'm like, people will be a lot. And if you go on YouTube, people are covering it and playing it, and people will be singing that in 100 years. Bill and Annie was another beautiful one. I loved that one. Um, Great song. I wanted to ask a little bit. We didn't want to keep you too long, but just in terms of other people that write songs, do you chat with some of the other, baseball songwriters? Do you guys sort of communicate or chat about your work, or is it just, do you play shows with them or not, or you you know, it's just interesting, curious to hear if if there's like a community. Do you guys talk about your songs or anything like that, or you just do your
Not
own
so
thing?
much, not
Yeah,
so much. Everybody is out on the road trying to, make their living playing shows, and it's not like we cross paths very often. But I do stay in touch with John McCutcheon.
okay.
I don't know if you're aware of John,
No,
but
no.
John has an entire album of baseball songs called "The Sermon on the Mound."
Great, great. I'll check it out.
And John and I have done 3 or 4 all baseball song shows in Atlanta.
Oh, great.
And we were joined on stage by Matthew Kaminsky, the Atlanta Braves organ
Yeah,
player,
I know.
stadium
Yeah,
organ
I know
player.
him. Yeah.
And we treated it like a baseball game, which was a lot of fun. There's YouTube videos of it out there, but basically because John lives in Atlanta, he was the home team and I was the visiting team. I wore
Always.
my Phillies road jersey, he wore his Braves home jersey,
Okay.
and I led off the top of the first, and John would follow me, and with the song for the bottom of the first.
Sure.
And in between songs, Matthew had carte blanche to play any stadium organ riffs that came to mind. And we
That's
filled
funny.
the night with great, fun gags. Like when it was time to take a break, we had the sound man pipe in the sound of thunder and rain. And we had some volunteers rush the stage with blue tarps to cover the microphones and the speakers. And
That's
we
funny.
treated it like a rain delay.
That's awesome. I'd love to see that. That's really cool. If you ever, well, yeah, we can talk later. If you're ever touring, you're out on the West Coast, I'll have to come check you out. You're based out of North Carolina now, correct?
Yeah, I've been in Asheville for 30 years.
Yeah, yeah. So, You're touring. I saw you have a lot of shows in and around North Carolina. Do you get out on national tours a lot, or is it more of an East Coast thing? Like, tell us about that a little bit.
Oh, I tour Northern California every January.
Great, great.
I get up to Michigan, I get up to Cincinnati, I get to Florida, Texas. Um, those are absolutely, every year. Philadelphia and points nearby. I'm not touring quite as much as I did pre-pandemic
Sure,
because a lot of the venues that I used to play just folded, couldn't survive.
that's tough. Yeah,
And traveling has worn on me a bit. So I'm still traveling, but I'm not pursuing every possible venue that there is, and I'm being a little more selective. But I go to Ireland and Scotland every year with group tours
that's right. Yeah,
where I'm not playing shows around the country. I'm taking 22 people with me on a bus tour. We have our own guides that travel full time with us. Those are a blast. So
that sounds awesome.
I do 3 or 4 of those tours every year, and I'm still traveling. I just got back from Florida. The great thing about Florida is that I can do it in March and tie it in with spring training.
Yeah, do you play gigs down there when you're at spring training?
Yeah, I did
I need to
four.
come. I
I
need to
did
come.
four this year, and one of them, in fact, was a private gig at somebody's house in Vero Beach.
Okay.
There were 11, just 11 people, 5 couples and a single person. And one of the couples was Sandy Koufax and his wife.
No way.
It was
No way.
amazing. It was amazing. I was sitting
That's incredible.
15 feet away from Sandy Koufax for an entire show, and he was just hanging on every word, big smile on his face. We had a chance to talk afterwards
That's
and
awesome.
get a little photo together, but that was a real thrill.
That's so awesome. It's funny, a brief thing about Sandy Koufax. I have a Twitter X account that I use to promote the podcast, and there was a discussion a few months ago after Ricky Henderson passed as to who's the greatest living player. It's sort of this honorific title, and there was a discussion who's the greatest living pitcher, and people throwing out Koufax and Nolan Ryan and so, and it's like I think because of his age and what he did, my determination was the greatest living pitcher was Sandy Koufax, greatest living player is Johnny Bench. I'm gonna give some people are like, well, what about Barry Bonds? Well, I'm gonna give some deference to age, but yeah, Koufax, legendary pitcher, one of the greatest. That's awesome. You got to meet him. As I said earlier in Vegas, and you see celebrities and stuff. We try not to get starstruck, but I feel like Sandy Koufax is one of those guys I'd be a little starstruck if I met him. So
Well,
that's
I just had to pinch myself. I tried not to be starstruck, and I,
yeah,
I didn't want to be that guy,
sure, sure,
that
yeah,
just glommed onto him. I gave him his space.
sure, sure.
Um, you know, I, I had to keep pinching myself as I was singing song after song after song and looking into his eyes, and he's looking right at me with a big smile on his face and literally hanging on every word. And I know he really enjoyed my songs. He told me so, and not just the baseball ones. He made a point of telling me how much he liked some of the other ones, and
That's awesome.
what a great experience.
Great experience. Yeah, I'll have to come see you. I was just in Florida. My daughter lives in Tampa, and I was down there visiting her. She's grown now. I'm getting older, lives with her boyfriend down there. And so I went down and we went to a Braves Red Sox game on St. Patrick's Day. It was a lot of fun, but I was down there for a few days. So next year I'll make plans. I'll have to check your tour schedule. I'll have to come see you do a show
That'd
when
be
I'm there
great.
for spring training. I don't want to keep you too long, but I did want to get your take on something to tie this all sort of together with your background as a Phillies fan, this Hall of Fame podcast that I do. I did an episode about Chase Utley, and I've got to say, if you want engagement, if you're a social media person, I get crazy amounts of feedback anytime I post anything about Chase Utley's Hall of Fame case. He's not on the ballot, but it's no, I'm sorry, he is on the ballot. I'm kidding. Saying he's been on the ballot. He's trending upwards. Um, but there's no other player that gets more loyal, support for the Hall of Fame or more, I don't say hatred, but it's a very polarizing Hall of Fame case. Um, I don't know if you've done a deep dive on Chase Utley's Hall of Fame case or his stats or anything, but as a Phillies fan, I mean, what's your take? It's a hot button issue, you know?
It is a hot button issue. I'm well aware of that. I had the pleasure of watching him play
Sure.
game after game after game. Um, I think he was a great player. I am kind of on the fence. I mean, as much as I'd love to have another Philly
Sure.
get voted into the Hall of Fame, I'm a little bit on the fence. I'm not sure. I haven't done a deep dive into his
Sure.
numbers. I can certainly speak of how valuable he was to the Phillies
Oh,
while
absolutely.
he
Yeah.
was playing, and he was the engine of that team,
Sure.
the driving force. But um, I mean, ideally, he and Jimmy Rollins would both get in. If I had
Yeah.
personally to pick one over the other, I think Rollins might be a little bit more deserving.
Rollins
But
has a good case. Yeah.
uh, still, I mean, Utley, for a certain period of time during his career, was very, very dominant and the best baseman in the game.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it was for a long enough period, but part of that is because he played so hard that he was injured
Sure. Yeah.
a bit later on.
It's
Um,
it's a fun debate because I say in my episode, he was a great player and he was fun to watch. A worthy adversary on the Phillies. The Mets Braves rivalry gets all the attention, but the Phillies have had the Braves number, man. Even going back to '93 and past few years, it's Braves Mets gets all the headlines. Meanwhile, the Phillies, it's like, we just can't get over the Phillies. So anyway, the Chase Utley debate is a fun one. I enjoy having it, and I thought it was fascinating too. Yeah, because Rollins, he's on the team with Rollins and Howard, and Ryan Howard. I mean, for a while, it looked like this guy was going to be surefire Hall of Famer, but sort of fell off toward the end, but still had a good career. So
he couldn't lay off the slider.
yeah, yeah. And the Braves signed him at the end of his career. The Braves signed him to a minor league deal. I don't think they ever brought him up to the majors, but sort of like Dale Murphy at the end of his career, going for the Phillies. Chuck, I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I wanted to thank you for having you on. And if anyone's listening here, I don't know if there's anything you want to mention in terms of touring. Is there any tour dates coming out you wanted to mention, or new albums, or any new material stuff you're working on you want to plug a little bit here?
I don't have any projects actually in the works. I'm still writing songs for the next album. Um, I won't be hitting the road for a while, although I do have a show in Black Mountain, North Carolina coming up in June. But I'm going to Ireland in mid-June, and I'll be there for about 3 weeks. I'll be going to Scotland in early September. That's I have a couple of small local things here and there, but nothing on the national level. No touring until probably the fall.
All right, great. If anyone wants to find out about these Ireland and Scotland trips, I was interested. Where can they find out more information?
If they go to my website, chuckbrodsky.com, and just look along the top menu bar, they'll see Ireland, Scotland tours,
Okay.
and you can read up on them. At this point, all my tours are sold out except for I have one room available for an Ireland tour in July, the 2nd to the 11th.
That sounds awesome. Do you hit the pubs and do the Irish music and play Irish
We
music and
do,
stuff?
we do, but we also have three private concerts on each tour in our hotel
That's
in
cool.
private rooms where we have serious major league artists, people that tour the world and play Irish festivals and art centers and things like that. The major Irish artists, and they play private shows for us at our hotels. I do a couple of private shows as well for the tour groups, and the other nights we go to pubs and we hear traditional Irish music there in those pubs, and
That sounds awesome. We could do a whole episode about Irish music. My mom went on a church trip to Ireland when I was a little kid and brought back 4 or 5 cassette tapes of all his Irish music. I've loved Irish music ever since. Huge fan of Luke Kelly and all that great
Yeah.
stuff. So
Oh yeah.
we could have a whole nother conversation. I'll leave here to letting our listeners know we were talking about some of your older songs. Your most recent album, Gravity Wings and Heavy Things, came out 2022. Has two really good songs I liked about baseball. One, The Country Needed Baseball. You want to tell us about that a little bit? I think that song it was set in a certain era, but could be set in any era, really, you know?
Well, it's a song that I'd been wanting to write for a long, long time, and I finally got around to it. About the All American Girls Professional Baseball
Yeah.
League, and how it filled a big gap when the boys were overseas fighting in World War II. And anybody that has seen the movie A League of Their Own,
Mhm.
well, knows the story. And it's just it's a song that I'm glad I finally sat down and wrote, because it was a long time coming, and happy to have it in the repertoire.
It's a great one, and it's one of those things, you look at it's like the quote from Field of Dreams, America has been erased and rewritten, and the great speech by what's his character's name, Terrence Mann and James Earl Jones. Look at all the hard times in our country's history, and baseball is always there. And look, after 9/11 and the pandemic and all this sort of stuff. So it's a great song about that particular period in World War II, but there's anytime things get bad, baseball is always there. And last, I wanted to mention the song that on that album too, "Cup of Coffee." I love it. We have a AAA minor league team here, the Aviators. They're the A's AAA affiliate. So I love minor league baseball. If you ever listen to my podcast, sometimes I spend longer talking about a guy's minor league history just because I think it's more fascinating. It's the origin story of players. So just want to tell us a little bit about that song, Cup of Coffee? I love it.
Yeah, it's based on a true story. It's pretty much literally all true, although because I took one or two small liberties, I don't
Sure.
want to say it's absolutely all factual based, but it's based on a former minor league player named Brian Mazzone.
Cool.
And I read about Brian in a Washington Post article, and it inspired me to tell this story in song. Brian was a career minor league pitcher. He changed teams over 20 times in 12 years, pitched all over, including in Mexico and Venezuela and Korea, and Canada. And at the age of either 31 or 32, he was in the Phillies system, and they called him up for a spot start. One of the major league pitchers had a sore arm, and it rained, and the game wasn't played, and he never got called up again.
Wow.
Yeah,
And his cup of coffee. That's great.
yeah,
That's a great
yeah.
story. Well, Chuck, I don't want to keep you. And I told you it'd be about an hour. We've gone a few minutes over. So thank you for your time and your additional time. But I
My
want to
pleasure,
really
Russ.
thank you for coming on. This has been a lot of fun. And I'll talk to you soon. We'll get off the recording now and I'll chat with you just for a second off the record here. All right, let me end
Thank you
this
for having
recording.
me.
You're welcome. Let me stop the